My question is about your submission, actually, and just to clarify Ms Clayton's point on your quote about some of the key features of ordinary Australian life, and you quoted that kids need to go to school, adults need to go to work, and communities need to be policed. So is that, I'm just clarifying, you believe that the lack of policing is the issue in First Nations communities?
It's one of them. It's absolutely one of them. I mean,
besides the fact of racism of police, lack of cultural understanding of police officers, we need more police officers in First Nations communities.
To give you a practical example, when I was the Minister for Health, with whole of government responsibility for the APY lands in the Howard era, the APY lands, an area about the size of Scotland in northern South Australia, about 3,000 people living there in 5 significant communities, or 5 separate significant communities. There were eight policemen for that vast area, 8 resident policemen for that vast area with 3,000 people, and they were all based. I can't remember what the particular settlement was called, but it was where hardly any Indigenous people lived, and they used to refer to it as the Canberra of the lands. All the 8 police were based there, which was at least 2 hours' drive away from the nearest substantial settlement. At the same time, in New South Wales, a town of about 3,000 people, about half of whom were Indigenous, there were 30 resident police. So there is absolutely no... Ceduna, a South Australian town of about 3,000 people, at that time had 27 resident police. So there is absolutely no doubt that large swathes of remote Australia are very substantially under-policed. And this, to be honest, is why there are so many issues of dysfunction in some of these communities.
Thank you, Mr Abbott. Well, as a former police officer who worked in the largest policing jurisdiction in the world, in Kalgoorlie, in the goldfields in regional Western Australia, putting more police officers in that community won't do much if there's not basic necessities such as housing, amenities, internet, phone services, after-school programs, connection to culture and country. These programs need to be led by First Nations people. But on the aspect of culture, you've also mentioned this in your submission, that in fact, this stems from a misguided view of the role of culture. Can you elaborate on that?
Well, culture is obviously very important, but in the end, I would like to think that what unites us as Australians is more important than anything that divides us, and I would like to think that culture evolves, and it evolves in ways which will bring us over time to better places. Now, obviously, Indigenous people should respect all of the things that have helped to make them who and what they are, but that's not simply the Indigenous element. I mean, as Jacinta Price often says, you know, I am a proud Walpiri Celtic Australian. There are many strands in culture, and even for Indigenous people, I suspect that the Indigenous strand is but one.
So just to clarify, Mr Abbott, you're saying that you don't believe First Nations people who have different cultures should be taken into consideration when we are talking about a voice to Parliament, even though there are different faith groups and different refugee and immigrant groups that call Australia home that are in fact afforded that exact right. So are you saying that First Nations people don't deserve that?
I'm not saying that at all, but if I may come back to you a little there, Senator, I mean, we are proposing a special voice for Indigenous people, but we're not proposing a special voice for migrants. We're not proposing a special voice for people based on religion. I don't think anyone should have a special voice. I think everyone should have the same voice. And the voice of all of us is the National Parliament. That's why probably the single best thing that's happened for Indigenous people over the last decade or so is the very big increase in the numbers of Indigenous people in the Parliament. 11 separate Indigenous voices in the Parliament today, not because of quotas, not because of affirmative action, but because political parties and the people of Australia, in their wisdom, thought that Indigenous people had the qualities to represent all of us. And I applaud that and I thank God for it.